All right. Well, it's 10:03 now. We can probably get started here, and I'm sure other folks will trickle in. But yeah, thank you everyone for being here today. Real quick, I'm gonna get started with our land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce our call. As funders and advocates working to create a more equitable U.S. agriculture and food system, SAFSF believes it is imperative for us to acknowledge that the roots of today's inequities lie deep in the history of land theft and dispossession from Indigenous peoples. I am based in Seattle, Washington, Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Duwamish, and Squamish land. As you introduce yourselves in the chat, we encourage you to acknowledge the traditional and Indigenous habitats of the land that you are on and to learn more about that history. I'm going to pop some maps and more resources about the land you're on at the links in just a second. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, for being here today. I'm just going to send this to everyone. Oops. Shortly. There we are. And yeah, we're really excited to have the Agree Coalition on today for our last Funder Farm Bill Platforms from the Field session in our webinar series. If anyone has joined any of the other sessions as part of this series, we've had some really great NGO partners on the ground sharing what they have been working on and are advocating for inclusion in the 2023 Farm Bill. We started this series in the fall of 2022, I believe, before I even joined SAFSF. So this was one of the first things that I jumped into here, and it's been really great, I think, to see the diversity of platforms and the diversity of partners. So yeah, without further ado, I'm really excited to turn it over to Paul Wolf at Walton, who's going to talk a little bit about their collaboration with Agree. And then Deborah and Madelyn will introduce themselves and walk us through their 2023 Farm Bill platform. And we also encourage everyone to ask questions as we go. We definitely want this to be a collaborative and good discussion. So please feel free to pop your questions in the chat or raise your hand as we go. And we can also hold some space at the end for a bit of recap and to review anything that Deborah and Madelyn are talking about today. So yeah, without further ado, I will pass over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Maggie. I am excited to hear from Agree today. It's an organization that the foundation has been supporting for several years in their work around conservation, data, and federal agriculture policy. And I also want to personally was part of the Agree Coalition in a prior position, so I've had an even longer time working with them than just at the time at the foundation. So you know, it's been a great relationship, and the impact that they have had it has been great on creating the conditions to drive adoption of conservation on farmland and around the country. So I will just leave it at that so we can hear from them and not me. I think Deb and Madelyn, I think I'm going to you.
We're up. All right, I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay. Can everyone see that? Get a thumbs up. Great. Well, it's nice to meet all of you. I'll go ahead and kick us off. My name's Madelyn Smith. I'm a mediator and program manager at Meridian Institute, which is the institutional home for Agree. I've been at Meridian for about 4 years now, and I'm the deputy project director of Agree. So I'll talk a little bit more about the coalition, but I work directly with Todd Barker, Meridian CEO, to facilitate the coalition meetings and the bipartisan consensus process that we have developed over the last 10 years or so. But Deb is really the expert on all things Agree because she's been involved since the beginning and is a strategic advisor to this work.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Madelyn, and thank you, everyone. And I will say I am zooming in from the land that is, I think, still owned by the Nooksack and the Lummi Native Americans here. And it's both land and sea, I might add. But yes, as Madelyn said, I go by Deb. Deborah is a lovely way of my mother addressing me when I'm in trouble. But I'm Deb Atwood. I've been with the Meridian Institute going on 13 years now, or I'm in the middle of my 13th year. I've been a strategic leader and advisor on Agree from the get-go, from its inception. And I'm old. I've had 40 plus years of working in the food and agriculture and fishery space in Washington, DC, and now in Washington State. So I am bi-coastal. So with that, Madelyn, back to you.
I'll just share a little bit more about the background of AGREE and the work that we do before getting into our Farm Bill policy priorities and some of our current work. So AGREE, the backbone of AGREE is really our coalition, which is a multi-stakeholder group that's made up of farmers, farm groups, environmental and conservation NGOs, food companies, and agribusinesses that are all working together towards federal policy change that, as Paul said, creates the enabling conditions for conservation practice on the ground. And AGREE was really started, I think about 10 years ago now, as a strategic bipartisan response to the interconnected challenges of feeding a growing global population. So I think what's unique about AGREE as compared to other similar coalitions and groups is that we really value creating a safe space for discussion where people can throw out their crazy ideas about food systems transformation, have a space for generative conversation with other food systems leaders, and really think progressively about what the future of risk management, farm policy, other farm conservation programs looks like to really enable conservation adoption. And as I mentioned before, AGREE is housed within the Meridian Institute. So Meridian is a nonprofit that specializes in facilitating collaborative processes around environmental challenges. So we've been the home of AGREE since its inception and have a body of other related food and ag policy projects as well, some of which we might touch on a little bit today. Deb, is there anything else you would add to that?
No, I think we're good.
So there's three main buckets of work that or ways of working that we pursue. We really focus on making a data-driven argument that conservation practices are a win-win for both farmers and for society by improving long-term resilience, supporting environmental quality, and supporting farm profitability. So as I mentioned, really the bipartisan dialogue and consensus building is at the heart of AGREE. We meet 3 or 4 times per year in Meridian's Washington, D.C. office to talk about current events and federal policy, discuss developments in some of our pilot projects, and create a space for coalition members to share what's going on in their bodies of work too. During those meetings, we develop and discuss federal policy recommendations that we then work on implementing as well. So we have a 501c4 sister organization that we're able to do some lobbying through to support and enact the consensus policy recommendations we develop. So we do kind of actively lobby on the Hill for federal legislation that supports these priorities, and also are in frequent communication with USDA and the administration on administrative action as well. And then thirdly, we are really focused on building the evidence base for the positive impacts of conservation practices and for the policy ideas that we're developing. So we commission research and we also conduct pilots to develop proof of concepts. We really want to do what we can to see the ideas that we're generating actually enacted out in the world. And in turn, we use those pilots to support our federal policy work as well. So the Farm Bill, the topic on everyone's mind. Deb, do you want to start with a little bit of kind of level setting on where we are with the Farm Bill?
Sure. Well, first I should point out that I think you all know Bev Paul, or you are familiar with her. She is our 501c4 lobbyist that we work closely with. And in fact, Paul, Bev, and I were on a call earlier today to talk about the status of the 2023 Farm Bill. I kind of want to give you an overview. It appears that the Senate may be ready in September to move forward with a committee mark. They're trying to work in a bipartisan way. I know that it'll be, I'm sure, tension, lots of tension in the room, but I think they're prepared to work in a bipartisan way. The House, it's very unclear due to major political issues, you know, from spending levels to the SNAP work requirements. It's a little bit of a mess. I know Madelyn's from Louisiana. One of the Republican congressmen from Louisiana is trying to work for a bipartisan solution, as Congressman Graves. And I can't, you know, they're trying to figure out how to sort out the politics of all of this. It's very difficult, very complicated. G.T. Thompson, who's chair, he knows he's got to have a bipartisan bill in order to pass it. Timeline, I'm predicting that they'll want a bill by January 1, which means you might as well be prepared if you're engaging in farm bill politics to be here for Christmas and New Year's. It's going to be difficult. And as you know, there are no new funds available. I think Chairwoman Stabenhouse made that perfectly clear, that if you're going to fund something, you're going to have to find the resources within the existing baseline. Now, because the Senate has stuck with what the debt ceiling numbers look like, they're being guided by those numbers that came out of the debt ceiling. But they're, you know, it's, the chairwoman has made it clear, and so is G.T. Thompson, no new funds are available. So you'll have to rob Peter to pay Paul, or figure out a way to do something to fund programs. And some of you have been involved with the 19 programs that don't have baseline. I will mention one, the food, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research does not have a baseline number. They have a baseline now through the end of the fiscal year, but they will need Congress to enact something in order to continue on. And I know that there are some small and regionally focused programs without funding that are stuck in this very same place. And I know lots of work and time and energy is trying to be spent by staff right now to figure out how what the future looks like there. So that's my overview. I will say, if you have any questions, we can pause here for questions. If you have, you may have more knowledge than Madelyn and I do about what's happening, but that's what we're hearing as of today, as of this morning. Okay. All right, well, back to you, Madelyn.
So with that kind of landscape in mind, AGREE has developed a suite of policy recommendations that we feel really represents a systems approach to supporting widespread adoption of conservation practices. A lot of our policy recommendations are focused on ensuring that there's a strong evidence base that is demonstrating the connection between conservation practices, risk management, long-term resilience on farms, and then aligning financial incentives and support mechanisms throughout all of the USDA programs to support conservation adoption, and then some of those other enabling conditions around technical assistance as well. So our agriculture data work is, we'll go into each of these in more detail, so I'll just kind of touch on them briefly here, but that's really focused on improving USDA's use of data, the ways that they collect, share, analyze data to facilitate that research, and making USDA data more available to trusted external researchers so that we can kind of unlock some exponential research and science on conservation. The crop insurance program has kind of been a core part of AGREE's work over the past 6 years or so. So strengthening that program by expanding support for transitioning to conservation practices and removing barriers within the program, improving financial tools to de-risk conservation adoption, ensuring that there's a proper technical assistance support so that farmers can be taking advantage of all the financial resources that are available now for conservation, and ensuring that we have strong implementation of the Climate Smart Commodities program, because it's really a historic investment. And I'll also note that we're very bipartisan, very kind of support voluntary, data-driven policy approaches. And throughout the presentation, Deb and I couldn't resist sprinkling in some comments about some of the complementary work that we're doing that isn't necessarily Farm Bill policy work, but is related, and it's critical to supporting our policy platform.
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to?
Sorry, I'm like.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. We're tag teaming here. Yeah. So working with Bev Paul right now, we are supporting the Ag Agriculture Data Innovation Act. It was a marker bill introduced by Senators Thune and Klobuchar. It was introduced in the 2018 Farm Bill and partially included in that legislation, which resulted in a pilot, which Madelyn just alluded to. But we're looking for a more robust version of the Agriculture Data Innovation Act to be included in this Farm Bill. And it unlocks the vast archive of agriculture data that is needed for research that will help farmers and ranchers with their productivity and decision-making, we hope. But the results of collecting and analyzing this information is going to inform not only USDA officials in the program that they're running, but it could help will inform crop insurance ratings and technical assistance efforts that need to be made and improved upon. So as Madelyn has said, driving evidence-based policy making is what we're all about. And believe it or not, I'll just segue a little bit here to when we've talked to people about we want to get the information, we know how USDA can get it and hold it in a way that protects privacy of individual farmers and their operations. People are scared to death of the results. What if we find something? What if we find something that says we need to do something in a different way? It's, I don't know, it's something about human nature and politics that change just scares the heck out of everybody. But that is something we've run into, but we continue to pursue it because rational minds actually do understand. If you got the information, maybe it's time to review policies and change what's happening. Now, the issue of data privacy still continues to be a problem for some in agriculture and some farm groups, but a majority of the people we're working with understand that data privacy can actually be protected, and we've done so through our pilots that we've undertaken. And while there's $300 million being invested in USDA, by USDA right now on their data infrastructure, they announced it a couple of weeks ago. $300 million is coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, but they are undertaking an executive branch or administrative action to improve their data collection, storage, and sharing systems. This is going to be an enormous task. And quite frankly, this administration, as has the past administrations we've worked with, said legislation authorizing what we're doing is necessary to protect their actions, hopefully that they'll endure beyond the current administration. So there are two other bipartisan bills directing USDA to collect, store, and share data in a, I want to say in an improved way. You've got the monitoring, measuring, recording, and verification data bill introduced by Senators Braun and Smith, and there's a Forest Inventory Data Act legislation that's been introduced by Senators Ossoff and Cassidy. So this is a hot subject. Information is key, and we're going to continue seeking some form of, maybe these three bills get merged together. I don't know, maybe the legislation we support prevails, but it's a very important effort. It underpins all of our work. So back to you, Madelyn.
I might just say a little bit about our conservation and crop insurance research pilot, or prevent plant pilot too, because that was a huge victory for this area of work. Put that in the bucket of pilot projects that we've been able to advance. So the prevent plant pilot is our shorthand for it, but it's a research project that we were able to conduct by negotiating a data sharing agreement with USDA to get data from the Risk Management Agency, from NRCS, and from the Farm Service Agency, and combine that data to analyze the impact of cover cropping and no-till practices on whether farmers made a prevent plant claim in 2019. So that was a very wet summer that resulted in billions of dollars of prevented plant claims. And by accessing this data from the Risk Management Agency and comparing it against conservation practice data, we were able to show that producers who had use cover crops and no-till practices had a reduced risk of making a prevent plant claim. So that was a really important research project that is adding to the body of knowledge that's developing to make that connection between conservation practices and reduced risk. Deb can speak to how difficult it was to get that data sharing agreement in place. And our CEO had to sign an agreement that said, you know, we would not release this data publicly or else there would be jail time. And it was just a very lengthy process with a lot of negotiations over Zoom for a long summer to be able to put that in place. And so a lot of these data policy recommendations are related to creating a more streamlined and equitable process to allow that research to happen. Because in the current status quo, you know, it's not impossible to get that data from USDA, but you really have to have relationships inside the department to make it happen. So it's not really a fair process for researchers who want to be doing this type of analysis that can help inform farm policy. So that's an important pilot project that we reference.
Yeah, and it's incurred opposition from a couple of big farm groups who were worried about data privacy, which were completely protected. In fact, our researchers were the one that touched the data, and ultimately in the end, it was not about private farmer data, it was about aggregated data and what did it show. But I think the fact is, it was the first time USDA shared from 3 different program areas data: NRCS, Farm Service Administration, and the Risk Management Agency. And it, as Madelyn said, it was like climbing Mount Everest without oxygen. Many phone calls and negotiations and lawyering, and that shouldn't be the case. There's a way to rationalize data inside the department. It needs to be done. But yeah, thanks, Madelyn.
The other outcome I'll briefly mention from this, because we were able to work with researchers, it was Bruce Sherrick at the University of Illinois and his analysis team that actually did the data processing and analysis work for this research. And because they had the hands-on challenge of taking these data sets from different USDA agencies that were stored in different formats with different references and put them together into something that could answer our research questions, we were able to also produce a set of recommendations for the way that USDA actually stores its data and collects some of its data that are pretty specific. So that's also something that we have put out in a report of the results while we're waiting for the peer review articles to come out for this.
And I just think to make a really put a big exclamation point on it, why we're looking at risk management, it has everything to do with the 350 million acres of land that now currently, or plus 390 million acres of land that receive have crop insurance policies. So that's why it's a big entry point into driving conservation on working lands, if we can, as we continue our work. Madelyn, there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, what was the focus of the FSA data?
Yield and what was planted. I don't have, I can't remember offhand, but they have plenty of data sources along with RMA that are important, but they're collected on different CLU, crop geographic zones. I can't remember all the reasons why, but it's important data on what was planted and yield.
No, it wasn't loan performance. We didn't look at that as part of this project. We were mostly focused on prevented plant, drawing the relationship between practice adoption. And we also looked at whether the cover crops or no-till affected yield and planting date. And they actually weren't able to answer the question about whether it affected planting dates. So that's not covered in the report. And we didn't pay for the data, but we did have to negotiate a memorandum of agreement with USDA.
it was a cooperative agreement with them,
Oh.
and we worked with them. And we had to go through a transition between administrations. This actually got started when Secretary Perdue was there, who really, he actually wanted to know. This is one of those bipartisan issues. That's why we've got Congress support as well. It doesn't matter who's in power. They want to know what the results are of these practices. What are the outcomes? What happened? We spent all this money. Did it improve? Did it reduce risk? So that's why. Are there uncooperative agreements? I will say, David Beck, it was the most painful. It was cooperative, but it was a painful cooperative agreement. It was torture. Torturous.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions about the pilot, so I will move on to our crop insurance work. So our data work really actually evolved from an initial focus on the federal crop insurance program. We all know that, crop insurance is a key part of farmers' risk management strategy. And so it's very important for influencing farmer decision-making about what practices that they're going to apply to their fields. And one of the kind of major barriers here is that farmers are really concerned about hurting their APH or actual production history and jeopardizing their crop insurance if they implement conservation practices. So for those of you who aren't crop insurance experts, the farmer's APH is their history of production on their field, and that's what determines how much crop insurance coverage that they're able to purchase and what price they pay for it. So it's something that is deeply protected. And so because we know that many conservation practices have a bit of a transition period where you have to, you see a reduction or a dip in yield while your system is adjusting to the new practice. That is a concern for farmers who are worried about harming their APH. There's also, several administrative kind of rule barriers within the crop insurance program that disincentivize conservation practice adoption, but there's also a lot of opportunities here to expand risk management options that can support that transition to conservation. So in terms of our policy recommendations, we have proposed a farmer innovation transition program that would address this APH issue. It would basically set a floor on a farmer's APH while they're transitioning to a conservation practice. If they experience a yield loss, their APH loss would be capped at 95%. So it wouldn't change the amount of their indemnity payment, but it would help them manage this risk associated with the transition to conservation. And this would be a voluntary option that would be available to any farmer who's purchasing crop insurance. So we're really trying to think creatively about how to kind of address that concern. As I mentioned,
Madelyn,
yes.
you might want to just briefly explain indemnity payment, what that means.
Thank you for stopping me. An indemnity payment is a payment that a farmer would receive if they experience a loss and have crop insurance coverage that would compensate them, would be the payout from their insurance policy. So there are also rules within the risk management agency called their Good Farming Practice Standards Handbook. And these are the rules that a farmer has to follow in order to be eligible for crop insurance. So since this is a taxpayer subsidized program, farmers are expected to follow agronomic guidance in terms of the way they manage their operations. These good farming practices very clearly state that farmers who adopt practices that harm their yield could trigger a loss of their insurance coverage. So that is kind of a direct disincentive if a farmer thinks that transitioning to a conservation practice would risk harming their yields. That language is very scary to them. So we are proposing to kind of strike that from the Good Farming Practice Handbook and allow for the acknowledgement that even though some conservation practices cause a short-term dip in yield, over the long term, there is a long-term increase in resilience. So there's also the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program. So the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program is currently the only risk management policy that's available that ensures the totality of a diversified farming system. So the way most crop insurance is written is you purchase a policy for each crop that you grow. So you would have your corn policy, your soybean policy, etc. Whole Farm Revenue Protection allows you to insure all of the crops on your farm under one policy. And that's particularly important for very diversified farming operations where you could, on a vegetable farm, for example, you could have up to 50 different types of crops. Now, a lot of those crops probably don't even have insurance policies available, and that would be a massive burden to insure each individual crop, even if there was a policy available for each one. So the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program was created in the 2014 Farm Bill. It's a really important safety net for diversified producers, but there are some kind of hurdles or concerns about the program in terms of the paperwork requirements. There are concerns that the rate that crop insurance agents are compensated for writing these policies isn't high enough to encourage them to prioritize writing them, especially because it's a lot easier to write a traditional corn policy or a soybean policy. And so we are suggesting that USDA conduct a comprehensive review of the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program to understand how it can be improved and execute those improvements to really strengthen the safety net for diversified farming producers.
Yeah, and there's a couple of questions David Beck put in there about NSAC discussions last week. Yes, that's, Madelyn just addressed the issue and we're aware of it.
Yeah, and that also speaks to, some of this too is just crop insurance agent training. These whole farm revenue protection policies are a little bit more complicated to write. They're a little bit more involved. And so there is, it's a lot easier for a crop insurance agent to, just keep writing the same old policies that they know how to write. And so there's still a long way to go in terms of ensuring that this program is widely available to producers. We also want to talk a little bit about AGRI's work to expand crop insurance options by working through the 508H process within the Risk Management Agency. So this is not a Farm Bill play, but this is another way to advance improvements to the federal crop insurance program. So the 508H process is a process that allows external partners to develop and propose new crop insurance program products that then become federally subsidized and offered throughout the United States. So we have gone through this program to develop the first federally subsidized crop insurance product that helps farmers transition to using a conservation practice. That product's called PACE, the Post-Application Coverage Endorsement. It was launched in January 2022, so it's been available for 2 years now, and it provides supplemental coverage to farmers who are split applying nitrogen. And if that farmer is not able to get out into their field for the second nitrogen application, and that results in a yield loss, this crop insurance endorsement would provide a payment to cover that yield loss. So because it's an endorsement, it's something that a corn farmer would purchase on top of their base crop insurance policy. And split nitrogen application is a really important practice to increase the efficiency of nitrogen use. So we're really excited about this policy because it can help farmers really feel comfortable experimenting with split nitrogen application and getting comfortable with it and decrease their use of nitrogen in the long term.
Yeah, and I would jump in here and add that we are, there's lots of interest by other row crops to have PACE be sold in their state and for their crops. Because it's in the pilot stage and we're, I guess, technically going into our second year of the product being purchased, but third year in terms of experimentation. Yeah, so there's pressure on the system to expand coverage to all states that grow corn. And we're hoping that we get there. It just takes time. I will say there was great questioning and consternation by the Federal Crop Insurance Board when we moved through the process. It was, again, another difficult change, but we persevered with data.
Yeah, this is a really unique mechanism, and it's also part of our work to build that evidence base for the connection between conservation practices and reduced risk, because it takes a massive amount of data and actuarial analysis to actually develop these products. And they go through a very rigorous process by the Federal Crop Insurance Board that reviews these products. They go out for peer review, multiple rounds of questioning. So this took maybe 4 years from original conception to getting this policy out the door. And we really want to help share information about how we did that to support others also working to develop policies that support their own goals. I mean, we really see this as a test case that shows it can be done and that these policies can be successful and have demand for farmers. And our hope is that others will come behind and also propose their own policies.
Yeah, and I would add, we have a second policy under consideration by the board, and they meet next week. Hopefully it's on cover crops, and we're hoping that they'll see fit to send out the proposal to expert review. But this is all under a cloak of non-disclosure agreements, so we can't say more about it. But hopefully by the end of the year, maybe early next year, we'll have something positive to say there. And again, the data that underlies this effort is huge and important.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions about this. So I will move on to
What's
the next.
horrible? What's horrible, Tracy?
Oh, but
I'm
I was responding to David's comment about all these
okay,
farms
okay. Oh,
in
gotcha.
the Northeast who don't have any crop insurance and
yeah.
then flooded out. Yeah.
I see. Okay. So agriculture finance. Well, the Agree Coalition is supporting two efforts. I want to say mainly we are in partnership with Environmental Defense Fund and with NSAC on two separate proposals related to financial risk. One is the Center for Conservation Economics. We are supporting authorization of that program. It would be a $10 million annual funding. I think we get that no new money is going to be available, but this is really an appropriations issue and has actually received some money for a slimmed down version of this center I think it's at the University of Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, but the idea is to build it out, and it's going to support farm financial benchmarking programs, both whole farm and enterprise level across the country. And the idea is to expand analysis of the farm financial impacts of conservation adoption, weather impacts, and climate change. And I think this is necessary. This is another place and way for information to be collected in a secure manner from farmers, from trusted farmers. And I know there's some pilots underway to build this out, but we believe that creating a Center for Conservation Economics is a very important issue. And as I said, Environmental Defense Fund is the leader in this area. And then the second issue is a multi-year development loan pilot. And I can't speak extensively about it because I don't know all the ins and outs, but there is legislation pending that a pilot be created for beginning and farmers and ranchers in 10 different states. This is a loan program administered by the Farm Service Administration. And I think the idea was to structure the finance with annual operating loans is something that needs to be broken out. In other words, financing the operation and then the annual operating loans should be two kind of separate accounts. And this would help immediate credit needs, if you will, for purchases of farm equipment. And it's been proven out. There have been a couple of conversations that some other foundations have taken interest in. I know the Tomcat Foundation has really been on point on this as well, on how to work with FSA to create an annual operation loan package with intermediate credit loan, both direct and guaranteed, for up to 10 years. Now you know what I know, and it's creating a longer time period, creating two separate ways of credit and resources for new and beginning farmers. Yeah, it also reduces collateral requirements for both annual operating loan and intermediate credit loan of not greater than 85% loan to value. Okay, these are all technical loan terms that I truly am not totally an expert on, but our friends at NSAC have taken the lead on this and are working. I don't know the status of legislation to move this forward, but there are marker bills being worked on to do just this effort. So we have been in meetings with Zach Ducheneau, who actually was an Agree advisor in our climate work, but now that he's the FSA administrator, he's very interested in trying to redesign this beginning loan program, or beginning farmer loan program, and we're going to lend our support to it.
And there's a question in the chat about who would provide the loan, and this would be an FSA pilot
FSA.
program.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's FSA.
And there's a question from Tracy, and I would love to answer that when we get to the climate smart commodities section of the presentation. Any other questions? Yeah, I don't think the marker bill has been introduced yet. We've been in communication with INSAC about that, and trying to help them think about getting a Republican co-signer in particular, because we'd really love to see bipartisan support for this proposal. So it has not been introduced yet.
Yeah, and we're looking both in the House and Senate. I know Bev is involved with this more directly than we are. We provided the policy support.
Yeah,
she's working on the congressional support.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. So we will move on to technical assistance. Deb, do you want me to take this one, or do you want to cover it? Okay. So this conversation about technical assistance delivery and ensuring that there is a strong system of support has really come to a head during this farm bill, particularly because of the massive investment in conservation programs allocated by the Inflation Reduction Act and the demand for technical assistance that will be coming out of the climate smart commodity programs. There's a sense that both technical assistance and financial assistance are necessary for conservation adoption, and that at this point the financial assistance is pretty well handled, but the technical assistance system is over capacity, and that could provide a significant constraint to maximizing the impact of these important funds for conservation. So that's why technical assistance has become such a big focus, and there are several marker bills and farm bill efforts out there related to authorizing farmer-to-farmer networks and improving and streamlining the technical service provider program that certifies professionals to provide technical assistance. And so where Agree is really working here is in our farm bill priorities, we suggested that there be a comprehensive stakeholder engagement and analysis process to understand how improvements to federally funded technical assistance can meet these needs, and then to design and pilot projects to test out these new models. And this is something that Meridian is advancing. We've been in collaboration with the National Fish and Wildlife Fund, NFWF, yeah, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We are actually in discussing how to execute this. So we are still, we're kind of convening on this subject within the Agree Coalition. We have a technical assistance working group that had a panel discussion last Monday about what kind of policy solutions are needed during this farm bill in order to encourage a streamlined technical assistance system that can really efficiently get money out the door. And then we're also working on a broader analysis that's going to be convening partners all across the United States to think more creatively about what the future of technical assistance really looks like to enable widespread conservation adoption. Is there anything you would add to that, Deb?
Well, I think